You're listening to episode 103 of Present Moment. Welcome to Present Moment, Mindfulness, Practice, and Science. I'm Ted Meissner. Present Moment is a podcast with interviews, conversations, and roundtable discussions. We speak with mindfulness teachers about their newest findings published in peer-reviewed science journals, teachers about their understanding and methods as they work with students of mindfulness, authors about their books and interests, and we also speak with everyday practitioners. The website presentmomentmindfulness.com has show notes for each episode along with resource materials. Kimberly Carriere joins us to speak about mindfulness-based interventions for weight loss, a systematic review and meta-analysis. If you've taken a mindfulness-based program, you've likely encountered the raisin exercise, in which you engage all of your senses with playful curiosity in the full process of eating. This is explored further with having an entire meal with an intentional awareness, being as fully present for all aspects of the dining experience as you can. It may not be surprising that this different way of eating, perhaps significantly different than a more common mindless consumption, may have some positive influence on weight control. Kimberly Carriere is a PhD student at McGill University in clinical psychology. Her research in the health psychology laboratory involves examining the development and evaluation of programs grounded in Eastern philosophies on weight loss. She is particularly interested in exploring the effectiveness of mindfulness and self-compassion in promoting healthy eating and exercise behaviors in obese and overweight individuals. One of her goals is to design a targeted behavioral weight loss intervention that not only supports weight loss, but facilitates its maintenance over time. Her current research involves implementing a brief mindful eating intervention that is aimed at reducing mindless eating by having participants direct their attention towards their physical body, specifically towards their stomach and its natural hunger and fullness cues. Our guest today is Kimberly Carriere. Kimberly, welcome so much to the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
So let's get started by having you tell us a bit about your background.
Well, I was introduced first to mindfulness during my undergraduate training. I was working with a graduate student who was doing a lot of interesting work trying to understand these sort of underlying mechanisms of action that sort of determine the effectiveness of mindfulness-based stress reduction programs. So I was working with him. I got introduced to that and I really, really loved it. And then I started to start meditating and everything like that. But I always had my heart was sort of always into weight loss interventions and healthy eating, and sort of athletics has always been a huge part of my life. So in graduate school, I was sort of very fortunate enough to be able to sort of put those two together, and hence sort of why I'm doing what I'm doing right now.
So I'm curious about the aspect of healthy eating and weight loss. Was there some particular aspect of how that came up in your life, or those that you knew, that made you interested in doing this kind of work?
Well, before, when I was an undergrad too, I was doing a lot of weight loss counseling because of the lab that I'm working in. We do a lot of things to do with weight loss anyways. And we already know in that field that eating habits are the most important, behaviors in terms of changing for successful weight loss. And I'm really, really, really interested in understanding how individuals not only lose weight, but sort of maintain that weight loss over time. Hence sort of my focus on eating habits, because again, those are sort of the best predictors of successful weight loss.
So in looking at this paper, which is about mindfulness-based interventions for weight loss, this was a review, a meta-analysis. Can you tell us what prompted you and your co-authors to do this particular work?
Yeah, well, it was just essentially I was sort of kickstarting my research project, and I was looking at all the stuff that was out there, and this is still a really, really young field. So I saw that there was no meta-analysis out there yet. So I was like, I'm going to do this. So, there's about 18 studies out there. So I started, putting it all together. It took about a year to do, and then someone actually published before me. So that was a big hit
I hate it when that happens.
into my plan. But anyways, it was okay because the ideas that I had in terms of, I was really interested not so much about the effects of mindfulness I was interested in the effects of mindfulness and how effective they are in terms of sort of weight-related outcomes. But I was also interested in understanding the differences between meditation practice or formal approaches and informal approaches, sort of dividing those two effects and seeing sort of their individual differences on weight outcomes. And those authors that ended up publishing, they didn't do that. So I was like, oof, I'm lucky in that sense. But yeah, it was essentially a curiosity. I wanted to know before I sort of dove into this research.
It's always good having validation of taking the time to do that extra level of researching. So in this research, you included about 18 papers, and I'm wondering what some of the difficulties you may have run across in comparing them.
Yeah, exactly. And it's always sort of an issue in terms of meta-analyses. And I mean, we find that whatever my co-author, Dr. Carriere, he's done a lot of meta-analyses, and he always says it's a huge problem in terms of because you're ending up comparing apples to oranges, right? So yes, all the interventions that I compared said that they were mindfulness-based interventions for weight loss, but sort of their approaches were so different. Some of them used formal approaches and validated approaches in terms of an MBSR program. Other used sort of MB-EAT programs. Others sort of made a melange of their own programs. Some people just did sort of informal strategies, like teaching individuals how to sort of focus on their eating cues and their fullness cues. So it's really different. And most of the studies, which we find that a lot in mindfulness research as well, they were using a mindfulness-based program for weight loss, but they never even measured mindfulness, or they never used a validated measure of mindfulness, which is so frustrating in terms of sort of calculating those effects.
Yeah. So it sounds like one of the things you ran into in particular was that there were perhaps different definitions of mindfulness. They were using different programmatic interventions. Some using SR, some using a mindfulness-based eating program. So you have some differences there. And am I correct that there are perhaps different numbers of hours of practice?
Oh, yeah. Completely. Because for those that were sort of really focused on this formal meditation practice, right, they were getting these participants to practice, like 20 minutes a day at least. But then you'd have other ones that were doing informal based practices, right? So just getting people to focus on or be mindfully aware when eating, right? So, their formal practice is much less compared to those who are, doing the very formal meditation practice. So yeah, it was a range of I think it was 15 hours to about 4 hours. It was a massive range of practice time.
So that mean you may have had a mix of programs that had just formal meditation and not much of it.
Mm-hmm.
Those that had just formal meditation and comparatively a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
Those that had both formal and informal within that range as well. So you might have had something that was perhaps more comprehensive in that it included both formal and informal, but the hours were so low, it really couldn't be compared to.
Exactly, for sure. And that's a big limitation of the paper.
So what were the results from your analysis? Were there different results in studies that used the formal plus informal compared to the just formal meditation alone? What was that like? What did you find?
So it was actually really interesting because, again, one of my main drives as to why I wanted to do this was to sort of understand the independent effects of formal meditation practice and informal meditation practice had on weight-related outcomes in terms of, weight loss and eating behaviors. And we found actually that, which I thought was kind of interesting, but it makes sense that the combination of formal meditation practice and informal strategies actually led to the largest effects in terms of weight loss. Then secondly, it was just formal meditation practice. And then lastly, we didn't find any sort of effects of if someone were to just use informal strategies for weight loss, which I thought was actually really quite interesting because I was making bets with the second co-author on the paper saying that we were going to find huge effects for informal strategies, but we didn't really find anything. So yeah, it was interesting.
Well, there's your potential next paper, just doing on informal strategies.
Yeah, actually, I'm doing research on that right now. So
Excellent. Excellent. We'll have you back to talk about that. So other than that, I'm wondering if there was anything else that surprised you or maybe that you learned during this analysis, either about mindfulness or just the ways studies are done or even in weight loss strategies.
I think the main thing that I learned was that I always knew was like similar to what the point I brought up before was that I was just so surprised of how few of those studies actually used a validated measure of mindfulness, and they were sort of selling the effects of their program in terms of increases in mindfulness, but they weren't measuring it, which I found, and again, it was so frustrating. You think that's such a simple thing, but like I said, less than half of those studies in that paper used a validated measure, which I thought was so interesting.
So they didn't include things like MOS or any of the other measures.
Nothing, nothing. So
Pre and post.
I mean, they would measure, BMI. They'd measure weight. They'd measure eating behaviors, but they would never measure mindfulness. But they were in a mindfulness program, and they associated the weight loss and the changes in eating behaviors to changes in mindfulness. But again, they weren't measuring that. We can't be sure.
That's fascinating. It's like making some kind of a sweet drink and not measuring how much sweetness is.
Exactly.
So what would you like to see happen in the maturation of the scientific study of mindfulness and perhaps in this area of weight management?
Yeah. So, in terms of this area of weight management, I'd love to see more research because again, it's such a young field. It's only about, in the past 8 or 10 years max that we've sort of turned our attention to the possibilities of having mindfulness being a tool to help individuals, not only lose weight, but maintain the weight loss afterwards. And again, some of the findings at the end of the paper, which I thought was interesting, was that it seems that there was sort of evidence to suggest that mindfulness-based programs are, beneficial in terms of weight loss maintenance. So that individuals who are in these sort of lifestyle change programs, which are programs for diet and exercise, they ended up losing more weight at post-program compared to people who are in an MBI, so a mindfulness-based program. But upon follow-up measures, people who are in those lifestyle change programs started to actually gain weight, while people in the mindfulness program continued to lose weight. So I thought that was actually very encouraging, and especially because I'm so interested in weight loss management in terms of like maintenance, rather than just the initial weight loss. I'm really, really interested in seeing how people can sort of maintain that weight loss over the long term.
Yeah, I was thinking as you were speaking that it's maybe with very good intentions and beginning energy, like one would make a yearly commitment to going to the gym in the first week of January, the first few weeks, they're doing that, but that may taper off. Seeing the persistence of weight loss and weight management, it might not necessarily be about weight loss. It may be eating disorder difficulties. That's another area here. But seeing that mindfulness may contribute to that and how those may complement one another if used together is an interesting area of contemplation.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of the research, I think that it would be great if we could sort of turn our attention to that and sort of see how you could sort of integrate mindfulness into these already, beneficial programs. Because there are a lot of great weight loss programs out there, but again, their long-term effects are not as robust. So maybe adding sort of this component of mindfulness might help in terms of that.
Great. Thank you. Kimberly, was there anything else you wanted to share with the listeners?
No, I think that's it.
All right, great. Well, our guest today, Kimberly Carriere. You can find out more about her and her work. I'll be linking to this paper and link to her page at McGill. Kimberly, thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate your time today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the website at presentmomentmindfulness.com. You'll find an entire webpage devoted to this and every episode. You can comment on the episode page and find show notes and other helpful resources for your mindfulness practice. The shakuhachi music heard on Present Moment is used by permission and through the generosity of musician Rodrigo Rodriguez. His website is linked on the Present Moment website on the About Podcast Music page. Sound editing, mixing, and mastering provided by the generosity of Anthony Dominello of StructureFromSound.com. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on Present Moment.